All right, hi everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started and welcome you to today's webinar, a review of Dodge Data and Analytics report on safety management in the construction industry for 2017. My name is Jessica Bunting and I am the CPWR host and sort of tech support for this event. So if you are experiencing technical difficulties at any time, please contact me either through the chat and Q&A boxes on your screen or via my email address, jbunting@cpwr.com. You can actually just reply to any of the WebEx emails like the reminder that you received an hour ago, and that will come to me as well. If you're having trouble hearing through your computer speakers, I recommend calling in using your phone instead, and that call-in information can be found in any of the WebEx emails you received or by clicking the Event Info or Quick Start tabs at the top left of your screen. We will take some time at the end of today's presentation to answer questions, and you can actually type them in the Q&A or chat box at any time during the presentation, and we'll do our best at the end to answer as many questions as possible in the order in which they were submitted. To make sure I see your questions, though, please address them either to everyone or to me and not privately to our presenter. And finally, today's webinar will be recorded, so if you are interested in reviewing or sharing the information with colleagues after the event, I will make it available. I will actually email it to everyone who registered. Okay, our presenter today is Donna Laquidara-Carr, Director of Industry Insights Research at Dodge Data and Analytics, and a major contributor to the research and the report that this webinar is based on. Donna, I'm sorry if I butchered your last name at all. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to get us started now.
Okay, Jessica, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen and hold on a second. I'm sorry. Very quickly.
It should be right under share.
Yes. No, I went under share, and I did my screen, but it did it just did the screen I was looking at. There we go. I apologize for the delay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to present to you the findings of our research study that we conducted. This is the third of a set of research studies that we've conducted with CPWR, and United Rentals has also been a major partner on this. But before I dive into the findings, I did want to tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about my company. So Dodge Data and Analytics, we are the ones who actually did the research, did the analysis, and put together the Smart Market Report that I'll be featuring. But Smart Market Reports are just a small part of what we do. You can see that we have our global network, the famous Dodge reports that I'm sure most of the people on the call have heard of. We also have our suites.com, which is a great source of information about building products for the design community. And the department that I sit in is Dodge Analytics, where we really kind of get a little bit deeper into the trends and the numbers that are behind the industry. And the division that I work for specifically, the Industry Insights Group, our major production are the Smart Market Report series. We've been producing these since 2006. While we do a variety of topics, they tend to fall under three major buckets: sustainability, technology and innovation, and practices and processes. And all of our reports, including the ones you can see up on the screen, are available for free download at analyticsstore.construction.com. That also applies to the safety report that I'll be reviewing today with you. So we're going to kind of do a quick run through the major findings of the report. First, I'll tell you a little bit about who we talked to, what the major focus is in, and then we'll do a deeper dive on the topics you see here in the agenda. So let's dive in. As I mentioned right at the front, this is the third report in a series that we've done. The first one came out in 2012, and the last one came out in 2015. Each one has had a slightly different focus, where we've had several questions that we've looked at for trending data across all three studies. And then, for instance, in 2015, we did a much deeper dive on safety culture. This time, we conducted the research with contractors, and that includes trade and contractors and prime contractors, over the summer of 2017. We had a pretty substantial response, 334 contractors total, and that was in part because in addition to our own contractor panel, which provides us access to a wide breadth of contractors across the industry, we partnered with several organizations who really value this kind of safety data, and that included ARTBA, ICE, NECA, SMACNA, and TAUC. So we were lucky to be able to access their membership as well. As I mentioned, these smart market reports often cover the similar topics from report to report. In particular, practices, benefits of investing in safety, and training and communication are things we've touched on in all three, and I will be letting you know some trending data on each of those as we go through. In this particular report, we had two additional focuses. We did a deep dive on technology. Now, we had actually touched on technology and how it impacts safety in the 2012 study. And so some of the data here is trending from what we learned in 2012, but obviously technology in construction, especially on construction sites, has changed dramatically since 2012. So we also have some updated and some new topics that we look at in that area. In addition to that, we also looked at the concept of prevention through design. And when we get to that point in the presentation, I'll go through exactly what that means. But to understand prevention through design better, in addition to the contractor study that's been at the heart of all three smart market reports, we did an additional study for this one in particular, where we talked to architects just about the prevention through design. This was done as an online survey using our own internal Dodge architectural panel, similar to our contractor panel that we use for the contractor study. Because it was just the panel, we had a very short fielding period, just 1 week in June. We had 108 architects who responded. And I do want to emphasize again that what I'm going to touch on, while it's going to be a lot of material, is just the top level findings. So there's going to be a lot more data in the report itself, especially if you're looking for details on breakdowns on things like GC versus trade contractor responses, on things like responses by size of company. And so I do want to make sure everyone's aware that there's two places you can download this for free: analyticstore.construction.com that I mentioned before, and in addition to that, you can go to our main construction.com site, go to toolkits and hit reports, and you'll see it right there. So what did we find when we talked to these contractors and when we get to prevention through design to the architects? Well, the first area we focused on was practices. We wanted to find out what people were doing. And in the past, we had looked at practices as well, and we'd done a pretty large, comprehensive look at a bunch of different practices. This time, to save time to get to some of the other issues we wanted to cover in the study, we did focus just on some of the top practices that had come up in the previous research, the things that we saw people frequently doing. And you can see the practices that we asked about, and the percentages at the end of the bars indicate the percentage of the contractors who participated in the study who do each. You can see that clearly open-door policies for workers to report hazards and including job site workers in the safety process is a very common practice. And the job site worker one is particularly interesting because that became to prominence, including job site workers, in our 2015 study, and we've certainly found that our findings in the current study reinforce the importance that this shift in importance that had happened between 2012 and 2015. So this attention to including job site workers is very much something that has stayed strong over the last 2 years. We also see pretty high levels of activity around designating competent safety personnel and conducting job hazard and job safety analysis before construction starts. And even above 50% are also carrying out prompt and thorough near-miss investigations. In addition to asking about those practices, we asked about policies that promote safety. Here you can see that while there's 2 that are pretty commonly used across the industry, most are used by less than 50%. So it's very common for contractors to use policies that are really site-specific. They're creating site-specific safety plans and health plans, and they're creating site-specific training programs. But when it comes to other things, like using measurable safety goals and pre-qualifying subs based on safety performance, fewer than half of contractors included in the study are engaging in these and have these kind of policies in place. So, real area for growth there in the industry. Now, as I mentioned at the onset, when I was talking about where you could download the reports, we do see a lot of differences in terms of the findings by size of company. Because, there's so much detail on this, I don't have time to go through all of those today. But I did want to at least present this to you to give you a sense of at least the kind of gaps we see in terms of the practices and policies that are in use. Now, every single practice and policy that you just saw in the previous 2 slides, we see that firms with 500 or more employees are using them far more frequently than firms with less than 100 employees. That is consistent across the board. The 4 that I have on this slide are the ones with the biggest gaps. And you can see, for instance, that when it comes to conducting job hazard analysis and job safety analysis before construction starts, it's pretty common. It's pretty much universal among contractors with 100 or more employees, and yet it is, only about 1/3 of those with fewer than 20 employees actually do this. And you can see that there's dramatic differences across the board on all 4 of these practices. We see also throughout the report, we find that larger companies tend to report more safety benefits based on their investments in safety. They tend to report that they're seeing better project and business benefits. We see them doing a lot more training activities. There are a lot of different areas, but this is the only one that I'll feature in today's presentation. So finally in this section, we didn't want to, even though we didn't have the time in the current study to really do the thorough look at safety culture that we had done in the previous ones, we did want to at least look at the major categories of safety culture indicators that we had explored last time to see to what degree people thought that they had an impact on safety. So we presented them with the list of the top 8. We asked them to rank their top 3. So the full bar here, the dark and light section combined together, means that a contractor had put them somewhere in their top 3. The dark part of the bar indicates that they had actually ranked them first. And from that, we see that the greatest value is placed on training at all levels. 77% say this is one of the top 3 safety culture indicators, and 41%, more than half of those 77%, rank it first. In addition to that, there's a pretty high percentage that tend to select empowering and involving employees as a top factor, although a much smaller percentage are actually saying that this is ranked first out of everything that they're doing. And it's a relatively similar findings for ensuring accountability at all levels and aligning and integrating safety as a value. Although we can see that when it comes to that, if you place importance on aligning and integrating safety as a value, you're far more likely to rank it first. All right, we also looked at the impact of actually investing in safety practices on projects. And we found, well, the most interesting thing we found in this case is the consistency across the 3 studies that we've conducted so far. It is very clear that most contractors far more think that safety has a positive impact on budget than those who think that safety has a negative impact on budget. Far more think their safety investments have a positive impact on schedule than those who think it has a negative impact on schedule. And you've seen the findings have been very consistent in 2012, in 2015, and in 2017. You can see that the majority of contractors believe that the safety investments that they've made have had a positive impact on quality. In addition to looking at those project impacts, we also looked at the impacts of safety practices on the businesses of contractors. Now, we actually had them to evaluate on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of the level of impact, many different benefits to businesses, but 2 really stood out with the highest percentage who said, yes, we really see a very strong positive impact from our safety investments in these areas. 72% report that their standing in the industry is improved because of their safety investments, and 67%, over 2/3, say that they are able to contract new work because of their investments in safety. So we can see that the safety definitely, the industry recognizes that it pays off both at the project level and at the business level. All right, so our next category is one of our topics that we kind of did a deeper dive on in this particular study, and that's technology and safety. And we looked at 3 different areas for gauging the impact of technologies. The first was building information modeling. We also looked at the impact of mobile devices and tools, and finally we looked at emerging technologies, things like drones and laser scanning. And I'll kind of go through each of these separately. So first, when it comes to BIM, personally I find this one of the most exciting findings in the study. We actually asked the same question in 2012, where we asked the contractors to rate on who use BIM, which was about 50% of the total respondents were using BIM. We asked those who use BIM to rate its impact on safety, and it was on a 1 to 5 scale, from very negative to no impact is a 3, to positive to very positive. So the blue represents the roll-up of positive and very positive. The orange technically represents, the orange represents no impact. The black technically represents the negative and very negative, but in neither case did we have anyone say very negative. So really those are just the negative impact ones. You can see in 2012, in the blue wedge, 42% said of those who are using BIM said that BIM had a positive or very positive impact on the safety of their projects. By 2017, we see the number of BIM users who see that positive impact increase to 69%, a dramatic difference across the 5 years. And we really attribute this to a lot of different factors. Certainly, more sophistication with BIM use is a big factor that probably plays into this finding. In addition to that, there are a lot more tools that people can plug into BIM to impact safety than there were back in 2012, or far more sophisticated versions of those tools. And we'll get to, in a second, to exactly how these contractors are using BIM to improve safety. But before we do that, I do want to let you see, you remember a couple of slides ago, we talked about the benefits, the business benefits and the project benefits of using safety. Well, we can take those 50% of contractors who were using BIM, compare them to the 50% of contractors who were not using BIM in this study, and look at what level of benefits they experienced from that previous question. And you can see that in 5 major areas, those who use BIM are much more likely to be experiencing benefits, including are more likely to see improved project schedules benefits from their use of safety practices. They are more likely to see improved project quality, their ability to contract new work. The higher percentage of those see that from investing in safety among the BIM users. Now, I want to make it clear that this finding is simply a correlation. There could be, one of the things that we often notice about BIM users, and it was certainly true in this study, is that larger firms tend to use BIM. And as I already mentioned, larger firms also tend to see benefits. So we can't say exactly what is the cause, but we can certainly see that there is a correlation with use of BIM and seeing higher benefits from your safety investments. But we did directly ask them, what are the ways in which BIM improves site safety? And you can see that 82% of the BIM users said that they think BIM improves site safety by identifying potential site hazards. 61% see improvement from its clash detection capabilities. 52% say it's safer because it helps them use prefabrication. and 51% say that their projects are safer because of BIM's ability to create 3D images. And on that last point, we have heard anecdotally from some contractors that it's becoming more and more of a challenge to find skilled laborers on site who are really adept at reading plans. The ability to have 3D images is actually becoming far more important on the site in terms of people understanding what's going on. And I have an example from DPR Construction about how they were able to use BIM to improve safety. It's a small example, but it does tell you in a very compelling way. They had to bring a big cart full of drywall sheets through a very tight corridor on their project. And as you can see, instead of just getting it in there awkwardly trying to manage around every obstacle, they're able to map out every obstacle that might impact its course through in advance, and really help set up the guys who have to take it through so that they can take it through much safer. All right, so that's BIM. The next category we have is the use of mobile devices on site. And the questions that we asked about mobile devices, we didn't ask necessarily any direct questions about safety. For this piece, we just said, well, what are you using? What is your company using on site? Not surprisingly, a vast majority are using smartphones, a high percentage are using tablets, and somewhat fewer are using laptops. And you can see that GPS and handheld devices are far less commonly used. But almost everyone who participated in the survey is using some form of mobile device on site. That said, though, we can see that smartphone use is pretty much saturated. The brown bar refers to what they're using now. The black bar says the percentage who think they'll be using these on their sites in 2 years. And you can see that the smartphone is the same between 2017 and 2019, but the tablets are increasing and the laptops are decreasing. Oh, pardon me. So we also have the top mobile tools used on site. And you can see that cameras are by far the top thing. Sorry about that little gap while I got a quick glass of water. But when it comes to actual safety elements, those are used by less than 50% of the total participants. So safety inspection software, safety training, safety and health websites not used that frequently. So you could say, oh, well, they're not really using their mobile tools for safety. But if you really think about that idea of understanding site conditions, cameras are a critical tool for that. If you think about having a single source of truth, project document sharing apps are critical to that. And you can see those are pretty popular. Also, understanding exactly how people are being assigned to things on site is another critical aspect of safety, and almost half are using them for that. When it comes to emerging technologies, we can see that there is some activity around emerging technologies. 21% are using drones on site right now. Again, not necessarily for safety, but just using them in general. 14% are using laser scanning, and 13% are using wearable devices. There are slightly more cutting-edge technologies where we see a much lower level of use right now, but it's great to have this baseline for when we look at these in the future. And this includes photogrammetry, robotics, and optical head-mounted displays. We'll be interested to see if those numbers go up over the years. But you can see that all of these really are emerging technologies because well over half of the contractors are not using any of these technologies on site to promote safety. Then we said, okay, you're using these devices. What is their impact on safety? And again, we had them rated on the 5-point scale from positive, 4 and 5 are positive, 3 is neutral, and 1 and 2 are negative. And you can see that the vast majority who are using wearable devices, laser scanning, and drones, the three areas, the three technologies where we had enough respondents to really have a pool that's big enough to evaluate their responses. For those three devices, the vast majority believe that they have a positive impact on safety. And we really think that this, as the cost of these goes down, as the word gets out, as people understand how to use them more, we really think that especially wearable devices and drones, it'll be interesting to see if we see a pickup, if we do a study in a couple of years on this and see where things stand in terms of their level of use. And you can see there's some pretty amazing stuff that's being done. Skanska has been using wearable devices combined with software so that they can identify places on their projects where certain workers should be prohibited from, things that would be unsafe. And if a worker happens to wander into that area, their wearable device, their vest, as you can see, lights up to let them know that they are where they shouldn't be. In addition to notifying the worker, their supervisor also gets to see that this is someone had gone in there, that they'd set off an alarm. It gives them an opportunity to work with them and make the job site safer. Now, we didn't ask a lot of questions in this section about virtual reality, but we did get some interesting feedback about virtual reality that's included in the Smart Market report in either case studies or thought leader interviews. One of them was Hensel Phelps' use. They had actually invested in a 360-degree camera just in order to capture existing conditions for QC purposes on their projects. Their safety manager saw what that camera was producing and realized it was a great opportunity, and he actually was able to convert the images that this camera created into a virtual reality environment. They were able to flag things that they knew were hazards on this site and have their workers walk through these sites virtually and identify the hazards. Really exciting way to take advantage of those technologies. Clark Construction also shared with us their use of virtual reality. For them, they do these training sessions where they want workers to understand what it means before they're actually up there, what it feels like to work on a steel beam that's 10 stories up. So they put someone in a virtual reality environment, they put them on a 2x8 to simulate the beam, and they found that the emotional response that creates has helped workers to behave more safely when they actually get, more likely to tie off appropriately and make sure, because they have that visceral memory of going through that process. So that's our technology and safety findings. Our next area, and the other major area of focus for this particular report, was on prevention through design. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was going to give you a more thorough understanding of what prevention through design is. You can see that what we used in the study, what we presented to the respondents who took the study, is the definition produced by NIOSH. And that is that prevention through design involves all of the efforts to anticipate and design out hazards to workers in facilities, work methods, and operations, processes, equipment, tools, products, materials, new technologies, and the organization of work. And why even look into prevention through design? We have some data in the report, some third-party research data that shows us that there are multiple studies out there that link between 22% and 63% of workplace fatalities to design-related factors. Now, imagine if you're just talking about the 22%, the lowest percentage of all the studies. If you could do something just through design to prevent 22% of workplace fatalities, think of the value that has in the industry. In addition to that, again, this is simply correlation. It's not something that proves something, but still, it's pretty interesting that prevention through design has been mandatory in the UK since 1994, and that the UK currently has a construction fatality rate that's 1/5 that of the United States. So when it comes to prevention through design, this is where we also brought the architects in as well, because obviously they would have a huge influence on whether prevention through design is practiced on projects. So we asked architects, GCs, and trade contractors 2 questions. We asked if they are aware of prevention through design, and the light gray bar indicates the percentage who said they were aware. And you can see that while half the contractors, the GCs, are aware, only about 1/3 of the trade contractors are aware, and only 19% of architects were even aware before they took the survey that something called prevention through design existed. But remember that we had presented them with the definition. So we said, okay, you read the definition. Based on that, are you actually practicing prevention through design? And you can see that a much higher percentage than those who were familiar with it coming in think that they actually are doing things that qualify for it. But we wanted to test that a little bit further. So with both the architects and the contractors, we asked them about specific practices, the percentage that were actually engaging in specific practices associated with prevention through design. Now, the percentages on this chart just indicate those who said they do this at all. So, you know, they might have only done it on one project out of all the projects they've done, and they would still say yes to this. So just to be very clear about what this means, but still, it does suggest that a lot of architects are in the habit, at least on some of their projects, of working with the GCs and key trades before the completion of schematic design to identify opportunities for prefabrication. So the notion of prefabrication being a way to practice prevention through design is pretty popular, and there's at least a lot of awareness and activity around this, even though I'm not suggesting that 83% of projects have this happen on it. I'm certain that's not the case. But 83% of the architects said they have at least done this on some of their projects. About 2/3 of the architects are considering the impacts of design either through design safety reviews before schematics or through a life cycle safety approach to reduce hazards. But in both cases, they're considering the impacts of their design on the operations of buildings. So again, that's, you know, pretty good. About 2/3 is pretty common activity out there, although it does also leave a lot of room for improvement. However, only about half of the architects currently conduct constructability reviews before the completion of schematics about how safety and efficiency can be optimized during construction. So clearly there is a big opportunity, a big gap for architects to more seriously and thoughtfully consider exactly how what they're designing will impact the safety of what's built. When it comes to contractors, we see that in general contractors tend to use the specific prevention through design practices more than trade contractors. To some degree, especially with the smaller percentage ones, it might have to do with the kind of work that they're doing and whether or not it's applicable to them. But that the most common are permanent safety features and the use of prefabrication and modularization. The barriers to architects doing more prevention through design. I have both the most influential and the least influential. Now, usually when we talk about barriers, we look at the most influential, and we're certainly going to do that now. And the top barrier by far is that architects are concerned about taking on construction liability. That is the big concern that prevents them from practicing PTD. To a lesser degree, but still about 2/3 say that lack of client interest is also a significant barrier. And there is some concern about, you know, additional time, which would lead to additional cost. But it is interesting to also look at what's not affecting them. Architects are not that worried. Only 31% consider the fact that they have too little knowledge about how to improve the safety of buildings as a major barrier. So, you know, you can see that the architects feel like they can find the information they need. That is not the big obstacle. Even more interesting is that last bar. The belief that PTD has a low impact on safety is only influential to 19%. So this does suggest that if you can get past some of the other barriers, it's not that the architects are not willing to accept the idea that they can influence it. It's these other barriers of liability and clients that are really standing in the way. When it comes to contractors, the first thing I want you to note is that there is no barrier that half or more of contractors thought was highly influential. That, you know, for the most part, most of them, none of them regarded any of these barriers as terribly serious. It is interesting, though, that the top barrier for contractors is that there's too little knowledge about how to engage in prevention through design. Again, though, with contractors, just like the architects, the lowest of all the barriers is the belief that prevention through design has a low impact on safety. So, again, the industry seems primed and willing to accept it if you can get past some of these other barriers. The drivers that are encouraging architects and contractors alike to practice PTD. Now, we did ask the architects about more drivers than the contractors. You can see we only asked the contractors about 3, but we asked the architects about 6. But the most influential drivers for both are owner and client request and insurance incentives. Now, for architects, that owner-client request is huge. It is by far the dominant driver. So it does demonstrate that education to owners, getting owners more engaged and making them see that this is a real opportunity to improve safety on their projects could be the most influential thing that could happen. And getting insurance companies involved also would be very powerful. Interestingly, one of the lowest factors for architects is guidance on controlling liabilities during construction. So even though they're very concerned about taking on any liability at all, it's not the idea of controlling it that is going to persuade them in the long run. They really need to feel like it's not going to be a burden to them at all. Okay. So those are the 2 areas that were unique to the study. Now we're going to go through a couple of different areas where we really have done trending across the 3 years, although in many cases the findings have been very consistent across the 3 years, and this is one of them. In all 3 studies, the top 3 most influential factors that encourage contractors to adopt their safety practices are concern about worker health and safety, which is very important, but also, just like the architects with the prevention through design, insurance costs and liability concerns are big influential factors that are driving contractors to really invest in safety. The most influential roles for improving safety. Now, it's important to understand how this question was asked. They were given several different roles. This is not the full sum of the roles that they were asked. But they were said, among all these roles, rank the top 3. And what you're seeing are the percentage who ranked ones first. So the percentage for job site workers, for instance, is pretty low. But it doesn't mean that they don't think they're influential for improving safety. It just means that they're not ranked first for improving safety. So what is ranked first? You can see that it's really those at the top of the company, that there's still a perception that the most important thing is to have safety coming from the top down. And when it comes to GCs, the top down means company leadership, and when it comes to trade contractors, the top down means company owners. We were also looking, well, okay, so we talked about what influenced them to make the safety investments that they've done so far, and it was liability and other factors. What are the most influential factors that would encourage you to invest more? And we thought it would be valuable to look at this based on the roles of the respondents. So you can see that this chart breaks out those who are at the C level and what was most influential to them, the company leadership, other than safety, the vice presidents and directors in the company, what influenced them the most, and the safety leadership. And you can see that while they do tend to focus on the same things, the weight of attention that they put on each is a little bit different. So at the C level, reducing insurance rates is by far the top factor that would encourage them to increase greater investment. Second is increased owner-client requirements, but it's a gap of over 20 percentage points between the 2. Company leadership, other than safety, on the other hand, you can see that while reduced insurance rates and increased owner-client requirements are number 1 and number 2 again, they really are ranked with similar levels of importance. And when it comes to those in the safety leadership positions, they care most about having more data on the positive financial impacts of safety, because they have to make the case further up that these safety investments are critical. And then after that, but closely following it, they put equal attention on increased owner-client requirement and reduced insurance rates. Okay, so finally, we also wanted to look into the new guidelines that OSHA put out on safety and health management. Now, these are voluntary guidelines that OSHA created back in November of 2006. And this guidance was intended to help the industry as a whole, but certainly one of the goals was to help smaller companies who we've said our findings consistently indicate are not able to engage as much in safety practices and therefore aren't seeing the major benefits benefits from their safety investments the way that larger companies do. And the good news is that there's a pretty high level of awareness of these new guidelines. 88% of the industry is aware of them. And that most of those who are aware of them are actually making changes based on these recommendations. You can see that it's, about 2/3 of those who are aware of it at all are making those changes. So that was a very encouraging finding. Finally, the last category we'll be looking at today is training and communication. Again, some of these things we've looked at in multiple studies. We asked the general and trade contractors whether they offer or require safety and health training. And I do want to go through this a little bit. Just to be clear, though, the percentages you're seeing on the bar are those contractors who said they offer or require training on at least 75% of projects. And I do want to let you know, too, that the overall trending you see here is very similar to the trending we saw in 2015. We couldn't do an exact comparison because we tweaked the percentage slightly. The last one was 70% rather than 75%, so that they weren't perfectly comparable, but the general trends about what they're doing most frequently, what they're doing least frequently, tended to remain the same. So when it comes, the most common practice is to actually just provide safety and health training and provide it to both supervisors and job site workers. This is common across GCs and trade contractors at pretty much the same level, and about 3/4 are doing that. However, general contractors are far more likely than trade contractors on at least 75% of their projects to give employees orientation training when they start work on a new site. GCs are more likely to require that supervisors have safety and health leadership training, or they will require that supervisors have safety and health basic training. You can see, though, that requiring that job site workers have basic safety and health training is the least common of all the practices, and it's really no more common among GCs than trade contractors. We also have been asking for the last 3 studies about the value of different modes of training for supervisors and job site workers. Again, they were rating them across a scale. The percentages that you see on the chart are those who say that these particular modes of training were of great value to the group that are identified. So you can see that everyone agrees that on the job site is the best training mode for supervisors and job site workers alike. But the degree to which it's the best mode is very different between supervisors and job site workers. For supervisors, classroom training is also considered valuable by 54%, and using an authorized OSHA outreach training is considered valuable by 48%. However, 84% consider on the job site training for job site workers to be the most critical, and then the next highest drops way down to 38% for classrooms. I do also want to let you know that this year, two things. This is the first year where we've added in virtual and augmented reality. So again, we consider this a baseline for what's definitely an emerging area. We're not surprised to see the figures as low as they are because we don't think that most of the respondents are really that familiar with them, are finding any great value from these methods yet. But we'll be interested to see if, as these things become more common, if this changes over time. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that, as I mentioned up front, we did ask this question across all 3 studies. In 2012, in general, the on-the-job site and the classroom overall for both supervisors and job site workers were pretty close in terms of the value, that the percentage who found them of great value. On the job site was still ranked first, but just by a couple of percentage points. In 2015, we really saw a shift to emphasizing training on the job site over classroom training. And you can see that the current findings reinforce that shift between 2012 and 2015. Online training, we've been asking about that for the last few years, but this particular set of results is from the current study. We asked, did you use online training 2 years ago, so in 2015? Are you using it now? And do you anticipate using it in 2019? So the light blue bars are the general contractors who say that they use it or anticipate using it. The light brown bars are the trade contractors who say the same. So there's two things that are very evident quickly when you look at this chart. First is that the use of online safety training has been growing and is expected to continue to grow. The other thing is that the line of growth for general contractors is much steeper than that of trade contractors. That general contractors appear to have embraced this. They were pretty close overall back in 2015. By 2019, there's a pretty substantial gap in terms of the percentage who expect to use them. We also asked about foundations for safety leadership. The CPWR led a year-and-a-half initiative to develop this training module, which is an elective on the OSHA 30-hour training. They launched it on January 1st, 2017. So we wanted to see in this study, to what degree it had caught on in the industry. Here we see that education is still a big factor, that over 3/4 still have not heard that this elective exists. So there's clearly a need for greater education about it in the industry. When we look at everything other than the blue and the black lead wedges, where the black wedges, those who are not sure about its use, when we just look at the orange and the light tan, you can see that among those who have heard of it, a little bit under half have used it at their company. So, it's pretty much split 50-50. So, right now it looks like once they've heard of it, they're relatively frequently using it. And again, we didn't ask, are you going to use it in the next 3 months or so? This is just, have you used or have you not? So once the word gets out, it should have a much bigger reach if the early findings are indicative of what will happen as more people become more familiar with it. Throughout the other two studies, we also have been looking at the most effective means about communicating safety messages, the chart you see on the left. And the reason those other 2 years aren't shown is because, again, we see that the findings have overall been pretty consistent, with toolbox talks topping the list and training coming in second, and chain of command having a somewhat high percentage of those who rank it first in terms of it being an effective means of communicating safety messages. So that personal touch is far more important, you can see, than text alerts or email alerts. For the chart on the right, this is the first time we've asked about it. And these are the top methods for providing information on safer tools, equipment, materials, and processes. The blue bars represent the percentage who are actually using these methods. Then, amongst those who are using them, or used more than one method, we asked them to rank the methods that they thought were most effective. So, if they had more than one method there, they had to rank one is first, one is second, et cetera. The light gray bars indicate the percentage of those using them who ranked them first. So you can see that toolbox talks are widely used, but even more encouragingly, a high percentage of those using them, 52%, actually rank them first in effectiveness. Training programs are also widely used, but a much smaller percentage, although still a significant percentage, of those using training programs actually rank them first. The seminars and meetings, email, those are used by just under half to about a third, and they're very infrequently ranked first. And videos are neither widely used nor typically ranked first by those who use them. We did the same format with looking at where people get their information about safety right now. So we gave them a whole list, said, okay, just check off the places that you use to find information about safety, and then when they had a list of everything they checked, okay, now rank the top 3 in terms of what is most effective. And the gray bars, again, show those who rank each item first in effectiveness. So OSHA is by far the most common place to go for safety information, and it's ranked pretty highly in terms of effectiveness. among those who use it. Insurance companies, 58% are using it, but only 11% tend to rank it first, and contractor associations, 56% tend to go to them for safety information, but only 12% tend to rank them first. All right, we also asked about the Falls campaign, which has been going on since 2012 when OSHA partnered with NIOSH to create the campaign. The campaign is a year-round thing, but as part of it, they do have a safety stand-down week. This year, it's going to be May 7th through the 11th. It tends to happen in the spring. So we wanted to see just how effective the industry felt this falls prevention campaign is. So the first thing, of course, is we wanted to know, well, how aware are firms in general? You can see that general contractors are more aware than trade contractors, and that about half of the general contractors overall are aware that this falls prevention campaign occurs. Among those who are aware of them, I don't have a chart for this, about 68% overall, GCs and trades combined, who are aware of the fall awareness and safety stand down to actually participate in either the overall campaign or the safety stand down specifically, or both. So, you know, about 2/3 who say, yeah, I know about it, are actually doing something with that knowledge. Among those, so these pies are just those who are both aware of it and participating in it in some way. GCs also, in addition to being more aware, are also more likely to, those who participate are to find it effective in preventing falls. Although it's a pretty high percentage, to be fair, of both who consider it effective. And there is, you know, almost no one who's actually participating feels like they don't know. They do feel like they understand the impacts of it. So overall, it's a pretty positive look at the falls prevention campaign, although the numbers of awareness at the beginning suggest that there really is the opportunity to grow these events in the industry. All right, so what conclusions can we draw based on what we've seen? First, we can see that safety practices are overall more widely used than safety policies, that the positive impacts of safety have been consistently reported across 3 studies, demonstrating the payoff of investing in improving safety, that contractors are increasingly seeing that BIM improves safety, that those who are using it really are, a much higher percentage are finding that BIM has an impact on safety. We're seeing the use of some emerging technologies like wearable devices and drones. We expect we know some of that's already going on, but in a very limited way, but we think it's likely to grow as their safety benefits are demonstrated, especially if the cost of some of these technologies comes down. We see that wider use of prevention through design by architects can be encouraged by insurance companies and owners, and those are actually also the same groups that can best encourage increased investment in safety among contractors. That online training is seeing wider acceptance currently among GCs and trade contractors, and that disparity does seem to be growing, and that toolbox talks are still the most effective means of communicating about safety. So those are the findings of our study. Thank you for going through these with me. I'll be happy to hand things back over to Jessica right now and take some questions. And Jessica?
You may actually want to leave the presentation up, Donna, just in case we have to go back to it.
Okay. Yep. You're still seeing it, right? You're still seeing the question screen?
Yeah. I just thought you were closing it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I just wanted to be able to see the rest of the tools.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the presentation. We have questions that have been coming in as you went. So just going back to the first one, the question was, do you have data on how contractors quantify the impact on their budget?
No, we don't actually have data on that. Since we do an online survey, we are limited in what we can ask, and it is all self-reported. So that would be an interesting area of follow-up, though, if we were ever going to do a deeper dive on the benefits. It would be nice to know exactly where they're pulling from. I know that we're doing some research right now in a different study that's looking at KPIs, and some of that might be able to capture ways that people are doing that. But that's in the field right now.
Okay, the next question is, what is the average size of the firms that have participated in this study?
Okay, that's a great question. So we do have a slight tendency for larger firms to participate, but in general, one of the nice things about the panel is that we can control that to a certain degree, that we make sure we launch so that we get a pretty good measure of size. And we measured size in this particular study by number of employees. Sometimes we measure it by revenue, but for this particular study, through all three, we've measured it by number of employees. So companies with less than 20 participants, less than 20 employees, made up about 17% of the respondents. Those with between 20 and 50 made up about 14% of the respondents. Those with 50 and 99 made up about 17%, and then, as I said, it is a little bit shifted towards those larger companies. Those with 100 to 499 employees are about 29%, and those with 500 or more, about 23% of the respondents.
Okay. And in addition to size, we've gotten a few questions in actually of whether you gathered information on how many of those were commercial versus residential, or if they were all commercial.
That is a good question. Yes, it's largely commercial. We did ask them about the building types they work in. There is some residential. About 35% of the respondents did some low-rise residential, and 27% do high-rise residential. But compare that, you know, they could pick as many of them that we didn't just ask them to pick their top areas. Compare that to things like low-rise commercial, which was 79%, and high-rise commercial, that was 53%. You know, and industrial, which was 68%. So there was definitely more of those who were doing commercial, institutional, and industrial construction.
Okay. One more sort of demographic question. How many architects participated versus contractors?
It was a little bit over 100.
Okay. Next question about architects is, let's see, I'm curious about the finding that architects are so confident that they know how to protect construction workers in their design. Obviously, architects study building safety for occupants, but how would they be getting information on the construction safety? Are you sure they were thinking about construction worker safety versus building safety for occupants?
That is a really good question. Yes, I'm fairly certain, because they got the questions asked earlier that differentiated between, again, earlier in the study, between the degree to which they're doing practices that deal with the occupants versus the practice, whether they're doing reviews for those who are construction workers. So I do understand the level of concern, but here's my interpretation of this, but it is an interpretation. It's not something I can directly back up with the data. I don't think that that percentage is so low because architects feel like they already understand how to do it. I'd be very surprised if that was the case. I believe they just don't feel it's an obstacle, which means they think there's places, partners, et cetera, that can help them do them. I think they're not worried about getting the knowledge, that if they are looking for it, they can find it. And that's not quite the same thing as saying that they know how to do it already.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is about contractors. How is it possible for contractors to be a part of the prevention through design process?
Again, you know, the practices that we talked about are part of prevention through design. One of the big ways, of course, is the use of prefabrication. That is one of the most popular ways, but I would like to go back to that slide. Forgive me if I just do that. So other things that they can do, use of BIM specifically for safety is another practice that contractors can do that qualifies as prevention through design. Now, I would like to say, though, that I am not a real expert on prevention through design, but CPWR has fantastic resources on prevention through design. And if any of you are planning on downloading the report, the website to go to for prevention through design information on CPWR is there. There's also other sources of information on that could give a lot more information about how contractors could participate than I actually have access to.
And just to chime in about that, we actually have done webinars in the past that were focused on prevention through design, and those would be all posted on cpwr.com or also on our YouTube channel, which you'll have access to when I send this recording out if you don't already have that address. But I know we had one that specifically addressed sort of the interaction between all of those parties that play a role in, the design of the building, the prevention through design stuff, how contractors and architects and engineers can all work together in the planning stages. So that might better answer this question as well.
Great.
Okay, let's see. Our next question is, during your technology research, did you discover any technology that would help prevent equipment rollovers? It seems like tech would help address this. For example, a device signal in the operator's cabinet lets the operator know someone is in their blind spot.
No, we didn't look at that. No, that would be very interesting to look at, and it's funny because we are working more and more on just in terms of some of the custom market research we do with technology companies who are really interested in this area. So I don't have any data, but I can tell you I keep seeing a lot of exciting things in the industry about technology and equipment, and I think that we are really on the cusp of a big revolution in how contractors can manage their equipment, can keep it safer, can keep it from being stolen, ways that technology can aid that.
Great. Okay. Sorry, some of these are just comments, not questions. So I'm trying to make sure I ask the right ones.
No problem.
Right. I'm not sure if you actually can speak to this, but we have a question. Should this presentation be included in the OSHA 500 outreach Train the Trainer courses?
That is something I really can't address. But certainly, if CPWR was fine with it and United Rentals would be fine with it, we would have no objection to that.
Yeah, and I don't really work on any OSHA training type stuff, so I'm afraid to respond to that as well, but I'm happy to follow up with the person who asked that after the event if you want to email me. Okay, let's see. We are getting a bunch of questions that I'll just answer real quick to everyone about whether the presentation will be shared after today. And I will be sending out an email. It'll have the link to this original report. It'll have a PDF of the slides, and it'll have a recording of the event. So yes, everyone will receive that by the end of this week. Let's see. And this is just a comment, but I'm going to read it for everyone's information. Just an FYI, ANSI ASSE A10 Committee for Construction will be publishing a technical report on prevention through design this spring. And it will be very helpful for contractors to understand PTD. So for those looking for more information about that, you can email me and let me know. That's from Mike McCullion at SMACNA, so we can follow up once that report is published and share it with whoever is interested. Okay. Next question is, are there any future plans to survey civil engineering firms who often work closely in the field with contractors?
We don't have any kind of studies in mind. Now, that said, we still need to talk to CPWR about what the next study is going to look like and be. We're still in the process of just kind of getting this one out to the industry. So that's an interesting thought. It's a good time to bring it up so that we can get it on our radar. The only challenge that we have with civil engineers specifically is that this study is very nicely suited towards Dodge's ability to survey architects and contractors. We have those architect and contractor panels, and we can survey very effectively. We don't have an equivalent panel for civil engineers, but that said, Dodge does have a large resource, a large number of civil engineering contacts in our database. So it certainly is a viable area to study and something that we would be interested in considering.
Donna, I just want to thank you so much for a very informative presentation and informative report in general. And again, I will be sending all of this out to everyone by the end of the week. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. Take care.